Hello, and welcome to the AB Relationships Podcast. Your hosts are Angela Lazariki, psychologist and psychotherapist, and Boris Hertzberg, psychoanalytic therapist and couples consultant. We talk about relationships and discuss some ways in which we can help each other in relating better. It is a space for sharing, discussing, and brainstorming common relationship difficulties, as well as real-life issues presented by our guests. Please note, this is not therapy, nor is it a substitute for therapy. Enjoy, as we are about to begin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the AB Relationships Podcast. And hello, Angela.
Hello, welcome, and hello, Boris.
Hello. This is the episode where we will be talking between ourselves and, of course, with you, taking you in account as being present here with us. And the subject that we chose to discuss for today is...
Oh, we need a drum roll now. I hope we can edit in a drum roll. Is self-kindness. That's what we decided we wanted to talk about today.
Yes. That's right. We haven't made any preparations for this topic, and we decided to discuss it as is. And let's see if we will be able to be kind to ourselves without preparing and not to castigate ourselves for being unprepared for this subject. And I guess it could be our big exam, which shows if we master this topic and can share this sacred knowledge with you.
I like the way you're presenting it, Boris. No pressure. Here we are. I mean, you would think, we're both therapists, you would think that self-kindness is something that we're very familiar with, right? We talk about it with our clients a lot of the time. We negotiate it with our clients a lot of the time as well. And ideally, we would also be practicing in our personal lives. So let's see how this goes.
Immediately, what I'm thinking of is that therapists are among professionals who are not very kind to themselves. Of course, not all of us, but many of us. For example, therapists tend to work long hours. And since this profession presumes that we are kind to our clients and we really want to help other people, sometimes it might come in the account of ourselves, that we sacrifice ourselves to help others. Sometimes it can be by means of ignoring our feelings or our inner state, because we deal with a lot of negativity and we help people deal with this negativity. Yeah, but sometimes in this profession, we do tend to sacrifice ourselves and not to be very kind to ourselves, whilst being kind to others.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I have seen it, well, certainly in myself, if I'm being honest, also in many colleagues as well. I'm wondering whether part of that is, I think in most professions, especially when we're dealing with people, a lot of the times it is tricky to practice what you preach all the time. So I am trying to be kind to myself and keeping that in mind first and foremost. I have worked in special needs schools as well, and I have seen it, for example, with teachers as well, with a lot of like behavior analysts that I worked with. So when we work with people, I think there is a characteristic which might be prevalent in people who work with people, right? Especially in this capacity, whether they're therapists or behavior analysts or teachers or nurses or, in that capacity. I'm wondering whether there's also that, where there is an aspect of, or a personality characteristic where, it's more of a service as well. So it is a lot harder to put those boundaries. Like this is, where I stop my job and, I leave everything behind. And it's a lot harder to find that a lot of the times. Not impossible, obviously, right? Thankfully. But it's a lot harder in those professions, I think.
I'm curious to ask to ask you and to ask myself, how would we define self-kindness?
Oh, yeah. How would we define self-kindness? I mean, some of the words that come to mind for me when it comes to self-kindness is well, I mean, compassion, right? I don't know if I can avoid that word. Not that I want to, but I think it's just kind of naturally comes up when we're talking about self-kindness. Compassion, first and foremost. Also, for me, a thing that comes up very often when I talk about self-kindness, either with my clients or just generally, is accountability. I feel like this is a very big part of self-kindness as well, holding ourselves accountable. Another important aspect is being aware of the influences that are happening around us, the influences that we're having from either our culture, our family, the circumstances in our job, friends, society, being aware of all this interchange and how it's affecting us, and being realistic about how it's affecting us. Because a lot of the times we do tend to think we have more control than we actually do. And then we end up not being very kind to ourselves because our expectations are slightly unrealistic. And that's why I'm saying kind of awareness of what is happening and where we find ourselves is also important. Not as a way of using it as an excuse. That's why I said accountability is very important. So these are some of the things that are coming to mind.
Yes, very good.
How about yourself? How would you define it?
Well, self-kindness for me, in addition to what you said, is also self-care and doing things that we enjoy, because being kind to others is doing for something good something for their good, something that they enjoy. So why not do it for ourselves?
Yes, excellent point. Excellent point. I like that. And on the point of self-care, something that I'm very passionate about is kind of expanding self-care to include, I mean, other than obviously doing things that make us happy, doing things that we find, pleasurable, that give us energy, that we're passionate about, all these things, obviously, right? I usually extend it to how we also talk to ourselves and how we think about ourselves. When we talk about ourselves, how do we talk about ourselves? When we're talking to others, how do we address ourselves? I think for me, that is a very, very important dimension of self-kindness that, in my experience, doesn't get talked about a lot or enough. How I'm going to address myself, especially in difficult situations when I've made a mistake, when I was rude to someone, when I failed in something, how I'm going to address that, how I'm going to talk to myself, and how I will frame it, I think is very important. And that's where, obviously self-kindness for me becomes compassion, it becomes accountability. So yeah, that's something I usually really try to bring in to the whole concept of self-kindness.
It's a very good point. I really like it, and it could be useful to the people who are listening to us to try to listen to yourself and listen to this inner voice in which you are talking to yourself at different situations in life. How does this voice sound? Is it angry? Is it criticizing? Is it dissatisfying? Which is your go-to voice that you use when you wage dialogue with yourself? Because many of us have this criticizing voice. It's actually what Sigmund Freud called the superego, something that brings us back to order and demands of us to be accountable, but not accountable in the sense that you, Angela, mentioned, but accountable to take the full consequences and to pay retribution and to be punished. Yeah. So and it's okay if sometimes we are dissatisfied with ourselves and we feel frustrated, but it's very different when our inner voice of the criticizing manner of this angry voice is the strongest one, and the kind voice which calms us down, says good things to us, is not very audible.
Exactly. Exactly. And a lot of the times, at least in my experience as a therapist, what I have seen is that many of us, so many of us, would not speak to another person the way we speak to ourselves. Meaning to say that we tend to kind of reserve the harshest of criticism and the most unrealistic of expectations for ourselves. We wouldn't expect someone else to meet those expectations. We wouldn't expect someone else to put up with being, spoken to in the way that we speak to ourselves. So we seem to be having, at least a lot of us, definitely not all of us, we seem to have this different way of addressing ourselves versus addressing other people, especially people that, we are close to us, are dear to us. So a lot of the times, in order to make that shift towards a bit more self-kindness, one of the first things I do, by no means the only, obviously, but it's like usually one of the first steps is kind of like, would you talk to someone else the way you talk to yourself, right? And most of the people, we haven't thought about that. We're like, well, actually, no, of course I wouldn't. Would you talk to your children like that? Would you talk to your best friend, to your partner, to your parents? And it can come as a bit of a shock, and it gives a little bit of that perspective, like, oh my God, that actually sounds quite harsh. Like, no, I wouldn't tell that. I wouldn't say that to my child or to my best friend. But yet I say it to myself constantly.
You're basically describing the mechanism of splitting. When we leave bad things for ourselves somehow and we give good things to others.
Exactly.
And it's helpful to pay attention when we do that. As in Angela's example with talking in kind voice to others and speaking in harsh voice to ourselves, and maybe trying to take something positive or leaving something positive for ourselves as well, not to give everything away, because it's also not a matter of quantity. If we leave some positive things for ourselves, it doesn't mean that other get less positivity from us. So it's just a matter of perspective and how we treat ourselves. So I encourage everybody who listens to us and also ourselves to keep some positivity for ourselves as well. And another thing also, Angela, that you mentioned is it made me think that if we talk to ourselves in this angry, critical voice, then we often expect other people to treat us this way as well, that they also will be angry at us or irritated by us. And that can lead us to not asking for help or to not establishing significant connections, be that friendship or be that personal relationships, because we just expect rejection. And we do that because we, again, project our inner voice, how we are used to talking to ourselves, on other people who are basically unaware of it. And perhaps they would be really happy to help us or to share something with us or to be with us, but we just don't give them a chance.
Exactly. Excellent point, right? We're keeping people at a distance. We don't realize that we're doing that. At least most of us are not aware of those mechanisms. But often what I do is I invite people to consider the possibility of perhaps speaking a little kinder to themselves, or having lower, more realistic expectations most of the times of themselves, and paying attention to what is, because usually what happens is that there is a resistance there, right? So another part of this road to self-kindness, if you like, is also kind of paying attention to that resistance. What is that resistance that usually comes up? And it can be different for different people. Obviously, it's not always the same, but it's very, very important, because it's going to be that resistance that's going to get in the way of actually, getting that kindness towards ourselves, that compassion, that empathy towards ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I totally agree. And I think it can also, the roots of this can lie very deep. I see that a lot, that people bring their childhood story of actually not hearing anything good or anything positive, anything emotionally charged in a positive way from their parents. And so they grow up thinking that they're just unworthy of love. If they didn't see this love in their childhood, it's difficult for them to find this love when they're adults.
Exactly. Absolutely. It hasn't been modeled. It hasn't been received. It's very difficult to generate. Not impossible, obviously, but it is going to be difficult to generate. That it's understandable, of course.
Yeah, so I think it can also be helpful for some people to acknowledge this difficulty, because many people go about and say, yeah, but other people live easier lives, and they have significant relationships, and they seem to love people, and people love them, and they love themselves, and they enjoy things. And it's also an act of self-kindness when you are not one of these people, or you are unable to love yourself to the extent that some people seem to love themselves. It's also helpful to acknowledge your situation, that it's more difficult for you, that maybe your childhood story and your deprivation of love at an early age still impacts you. So it's okay to take it gradually, and to be kind to yourself, and to give yourself an opportunity to deal with it gradually, and without expecting to do it yesterday. You can do it today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and yeah, life is long after all.
Absolutely. I think you're making an excellent point, because what we see is like the more self-kindness there is in a person, the less they compare themselves to other people. Because comparison, especially when it happens constantly, and especially when we're on the losing side constantly, is actually a form of self-aggression. And it puts us, again, it kind of perpetuates this cycle of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not, as you say, I'm not as self-confident as should be, I don't seem to attract friendships or people. So again, we're kind of aware of ourselves, but we are aware of ourselves in a very, very negative light, which, to be honest, most of the times is not going to be accurate. That light is usually not accurate. So the more we move towards self-kindness, we're getting not only a more realistic view of ourselves, which I think is very important, but we're also moving away from comparison as well to other people.
Yes, very, very good. I also think that when we compare ourselves to others, we are always on the losing side, because when the person is happy, why compare themselves? And if the person seems happy, they have money and social status and relationships and take anything, but they still compare themselves with others, it probably makes them doubt their happiness. So there is something wrong there, and they lack self-confidence, and all these beautiful things that they have do not make them happy. So it's also an act of self-kindness to be able to appreciate what we have, because I heard once, I don't remember from where or from whom, this phrase that many people would be envious of you, of what you have. They would love to have the same, and many people would be envious of them, of what they have. So it's also important to actually appreciate, or at least to some degree appreciate, what we have. And it could be a good act of self-kindness, and it would also lower our comparing ourselves with other people to their advantage, and it's always to their advantage. We always want something that we don't have, and we think that others have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So true. I completely agree with what you just said, all of it. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
You were very kind to agree.
Well, it's also because I think it's accurate. That is what we see. Yes, it's not just me being kind, although I am kind.
Yes, you are.
But yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those things. I mean, I usually, with many of my clients, I sound like a broken record a lot of the times. And I'm really sorry if anyone, my clients, is listening to this. I apologize, because I keep on saying that ideally we want to include ourselves in our lives, but we want to include ourselves in a light that is kind and realistic, right? And realistic doesn't mean like, drag ourselves down. It means like I have perspective, right? I know where I am and what I want and what is possible and how to get there. But we want to be including our lives, ourselves in the equation of our life, if you like.
Very nice. I'm not one of your clients, but it sounds very, very inspiring and very heartwarming, I would say.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think it would be a note of self-kindness now to say that we are happy to bring this episode to an end, and we hope that it was interesting to you to listen to this discussion and to participate in it internally with your inner voice, and maybe your inner voice has become kinder to you. At least we hope so. Let us know in the comments.
Mhm.
And thank you for being with us, and hope to see you again and to hear you again, or you to hear us again in the next
Yeah.
episode.
Yes. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You were listening to the AB Relationships Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends and subscribe to be notified of the new episodes. If you would like to become our next guest, please leave your details in the form in the description. If you have any questions or would like to talk to the hosts, please also refer to the description.